Good afternoon. My name is Sally Berkery and I'm the Managing Director of CEW UK. Brand building through a pandemic is far from business as usual, as we all know, and homebound lifestyles and restricted social interactions have really impacted consumer priorities, consumer preferences and purchases. And the beauty and skincare industry has felt this keenly. This afternoon, I'm really delighted to welcome Carly O'Brien, CMO of digital retailer and CEW partner, The Very Group. The Very Group are the UK's largest integrated digital retailer and financial services provider, and we have been proud partners with them since 2019. Carly will be joined by Grace Letley of agency partner Dentsu, and they're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so discussing the lessons that they have learned this year around reacting in real time, overcoming COVID campaign constraints, and the digital wins that brands need to maintain a culturally relevant dialogue to unmask a brand's full potential. Please do ask questions via the Q&A panel at the bottom, and they'll definitely try and get to those at the end. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Carly.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sally. Good afternoon, everybody. So as Sally said, sort of pivoting in a pandemic. So, you know, what do we know this year? There's been so much change. We're still facing it. There's still change every day, and the one thing that we know for sure is that there's more to come. So the world in front of us is an ever-changing thing. So it's, you know, there's no longer a question of should we pivot. The question is we must pivot, and how do we do so? So what we're going to be talking about today is just taking a step back for a minute, looking at some of those macro changes in the broader landscape, what they mean for us, and then really starting to get into some detail about some specific challenges. So we've got 5 specific challenges that we want to just dig into in a bit more detail. And we will share some ideas and some case studies of where we've seen brands pivot in response of those challenges in a successful way, and really take from that the learnings that we could all apply to our own brands, so that we can make sure that we're performing our best in this challenging situation that we all find ourselves in. So I'm going to first hand you over to Grace, who's going to take us through the macro landscape, and then we'll dive into those 5 challenges.
Brilliant, thank you, Carly. So I think if we click on a couple of slides, then we'll get to this overarching macro view. So I think it's fair to say, you know, this fast-moving disruption caused by the pandemic is, for many of us, like nothing we've lived through before. And it sent ripples through the markets that we work in, and our lives as well. We've seen industries contract along with marketing budgets as consumers change the way they live their lives. But for marketers, there are really significant short and long-term gains to be had by holding your nerve and holding the hands of your customer base through this torrid time, which thankfully, with the recent news, is taking a turn for the better. So we're going to give you a top-line view on some of those changes around the disrupted routines, the evolving need states they've created in people, the acceleration of certain trends that it's triggered, and through all of this disruption, the rising expectations that people have of brands, which is certainly an opportunity for all of us. So the next slide, when Boris Johnson announced lockdown in March 2020, it triggered a total upheaval and rapid and immediate change. Suddenly outside was cancelled, our movements were restricted, and we had to pivot our own lives to sort of set up for a life lived at home. And of course, the impact of that was twofold for marketers. One is that change in lifestyle suddenly drastically changed consumer demands, as you can see from the Captivate data on the right-hand side of the chart. You know, really humongous swings, both positive and negative, vastly differently affecting different industries. And we know the beauty industry has felt this particularly keenly. So as well as that change in demand and what consumers need, the other element of change was around if their lifestyles are changing, their media consumption is changing. So again, for marketers, all these well-laid communication plans were suddenly overnight out of date and had to be updated to maintain relevance. So a lot of disruption to deal with, but it's not just sort of functional disruption. As we see on the next, it's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster, really. The pandemic hasn't been a singular event. It's been an evolving crisis, and how we collectively as a nation have felt through that crisis has really had its ups and downs, which I think this grey consulting chart illustrates nicely. There was the initial phase when we first went into lockdown, high anxiety triggered by a lot of unknowns. Then there was sort of a adaptation, moved into a bit more of an ambivalence, really, when it all just got a bit dull, us kind of being locked at home. There were fewer unknowns, and it just kind of was accepted. Then we had the emergence from lockdown. Things started looking up. People really enjoyed their newfound freedoms, like dashes to the hairdressers and other salon appointments that were allowed was an absolute joy. But of course, it was relatively short-lived. We've now recently entered into the second lockdown. We've been there before, not such high anxiety because we don't know what's going on, but gosh, it's winter and it's dark, and it has certainly been hard. And now we are, I'm pleased to say, on the road to recovery with the vaccine announcement yesterday in terms of it being signed off. And there's definitely plenty of hope for the future. But one thing's for sure, that kind of torrid up and down of emotions, that fluctuation is not going to change anytime soon. There's still quite a long way to go on that road to recovery, and tuning into those emotional needs and mindsets is going to continue to be really important. And so with all that disruption and change, of course, consumers' needs changed. As I mentioned, we've had to redesign our entire lives to be lived from home. That's working from home, schooling from home, staying fit and healthy at home, and staying entertained. All of these you'll be familiar with. The surges in online fitness classes, the need for that self-care, the bizarre rise in puzzle purchase. I still don't know how anyone brought themselves to do it, but it's all these changes that we see so drastically overnight. The big picture is that 57% of people have adapted their homes specifically to meet these needs, spending no small amount of money on doing so. So where consumer needs change, obviously the pounds follow, and staying tuned to that is being really, really important. And of course, that need for entertainment, which we saw, really shine through. We've had so many of our cultural outlets kind of cut off. Well, where there's the will, there's a way. And that demand for culture is really kind of kept up, and it's found new and ingenious ways. Streaming has been absolutely huge. And I'm sure everyone has either watched or been a part of a conversation or heard about Normal People, Tiger King, more recently Emily in Paris. It's kind of inescapable. They've created these new on-demand moments that are interesting for us to be a part of those conversations, our brands and marketers. There's also a consumer kind of curiosity to develop and stay engaged and bettering themselves, which we've seen a lot of home learning and home crafting sessions too, which you'll see some interesting examples of in brands later. Live streaming culture isn't just about streaming from Netflix and the BBC, it's also about influencers and their live Insta stories and Instagram live sessions. That appointment to view has been really important way of bringing communities together and engaging audiences. And when many are isolated in their homes on their own, or simply, isolated from the friends and family that they would usually see, this sense of community through online connection and live streaming has been massive. And finally, this element of bringing the outdoor experiences into our homes is a theme that we'll explore in some more depth later, but it's been a really important way of us staying entertained and engaged and actually trying out a lot of new things. That picture there is an example of Gucci launching the first ever virtual shoe try-on through Snap. All sorts of ingenuity that we've enjoyed. And in amongst all of this change, consumers are expecting more and more of brands. As you can see there, 75%, 3/4 agree that brands have a responsibility to help out during the pandemic, and 62% think that they can actually play an important, a vital role. And this presents a really clear opportunity for brands to step up and add value, whether that's at a large societal level in terms of some of the steps and grand gestures we've seen happen, and some of the functional ways in which brands have turned their operations to aid societal integration. Then it's also whether it's one consumer at a time on a much smaller scale is just as important. that's where we need to be directing our focus. And 65% of people have said that how well brands deal with the pandemic and respond to these needs will actually impact their future purchasing decisions. So against this tidal wave of change, I think some temporary, some here to stay, we're now going to dive into these 5 challenges and the pivots that we've seen brands make and the industry as a whole to respond to them, with a raft of examples underpinning it. And the first is this challenge to reflect the mood of a nation in crisis. There are different tools in which we have to sort of tune into this. On the left, you see a YouGov mood barometer, which they've had in place since long before the pandemic, as it happens. On the right is some of Very's own consumer mindset data, which is a survey conducted amongst their highly engaged customers. It is complete with vox pops and videos, and as well as a raft of quotes that you can see here. And it's so important to find these ways of tapping into on a macro and a more individual level, what are consumers saying and how are they feeling? As you can see on the right hand side from that selection of quotes, you know, there's a real mix of some things being extremely functional, you know, presents will need to be mailed, we can't deliver them in person, thinking about how they'll prepare ahead. Others are much more emotional. You know, I can't see my family, what's the point of Christmas if that can't happen? And so understanding how people are feeling and when they're feeling it as well is really, really important, because it always is, as marketers, to be tuned into our consumers, but never has it been more important to strike the right tone and be empathetic in our communications.
So what's the first pivot? So against that backdrop, we wanted to share some examples, first from some of the brands, and then I'll take you through a very example of how brands have really stepped into this. And I think, you know, in the early stages of the pandemic, there was real a sense of pulling together and a real appetite for brands to really show support. And I think what that created was these really interesting opportunities for brands to do that in a way that was also really true to their brand purpose and really relevant and specific to their audience, rather than that be generic sort of support. So, you know, one of the examples from a very perspective, of course, given that we've got a financial services element to our proposition, was immediately stepping into things like payment holidays and making sure people had the reassurances around that aspect of their relationship with us. And I'll come on to some more retail examples shortly. But firstly, what you can see on the screen here is just a few brands that we thought had a really interesting approach, because the way that they delivered support was super relevant to their business. So if we look first at the top left there, we've got Shea Moisture, obviously known for their hydrating hair products, and what they've really stepped into is really offering support to the salon industry. So we all missed, as Grace said, our trips to the hairdressers over that period of time, and I think that's a part of the industry that's been really heavily hit during the pandemic. And what they've done is stepped in to say they're going to support female-led salon owners from minority backgrounds. So it's really, really well connected with what their business is all about, their brand purpose, and then absolutely from a product perspective, perfect linkage into the salon industry. So a really interesting way for them to reach out and offer support to that group of salon owners. Another example, if we look at the bottom right, is This Works, obviously well known for their calming products. They've obviously been busy, you know, donating lots of products and things to good causes. But one of the things that they've also done is really a sense of repurposing a part of their business that perhaps was being underutilized at that period of time. In this instance, it was their contact center, and they opened that up just for people who were feeling lonely and just wanted to chat. So the really interesting piece with this, I think, is where brands were able to tap into that underutilized capacity they had because of changes in the landscape impacting their business, but really repurpose those, for the greater good of society, but in a way that also made really good sense for their brand purpose. So just a couple of ideas, examples that we wanted to pull out there. In terms of what we did from a Very perspective, as I said, we obviously had our payment holidays and really thinking about our financial services proposition. We also created a network with our local NHS hospitals, and we provided packages of items that we sell that were useful for them in that period of time, and we delivered those in our local communities. But one of the things we wanted to do was to provide some useful support really for our customers. So, you know, families is our core audience. And we really wanted to just step back and say, well, what could we do that's authentic to us, that makes sense to us, but actually can be genuinely helpful to this audience. One of the things that we know happened was many of us found ourselves at home with kids to both keep entertained and potentially homeschool, a lot of the times doing that alongside home working as well. So what we wanted to produce was a set of content that could give parents a little bit of help to engage with their children and engage in reading. So what we did was we partnered with Core & Beanstalk, who are our corporate charity, to create a set of stories. We leaned into some celebrity partnerships that we already had in place as a brand, so people that we'd worked with before. We launched, as you can see here, with Vogue Williams, and we followed up with 7 other celebrities, and then we also did videos with 4 of Beanstalk's volunteer readers. So what Beanstalk is essentially all about is they go into schools and they have a whole network of volunteers that go into schools and help children with their reading. So obviously with the schools closed, they were not able to access the schools, they weren't able to provide that support. So this was all about taking some great books, some really engaging celebrities, sometimes, as you can see there, with Vogue, with their children, sometimes just reading themselves. And we created videos that we were then able to share with our audience, just to give them that little bit of respite when you've got a 2-year-old that you've kept busy all day long in lockdown, something that they can watch and engage with. And it came with activities at the end that you could do with your children all around that book. So it just helped with that sort of add-on activities around it. It was really successful for us. We've reached over 2.7 million people with this. The view-through rates were really, really high, so more than double the industry benchmark in terms of people really consuming the full content that we produce, which I think also just speaks to the real hunger for video content at that period of time, because we all had so much more time at home, really absolutely heightened appetite and demand for that type of content. So this has worked really, really well for us, and we're really proud of it. And all of our celebrity partners that we've worked with over the years very kindly gave up their time for free to contribute towards that in support of Core & Beanstalk, who, as I say, are our corporate charity.
Brilliant. So on to challenge number 2. This is, as you know, we've all experienced, those governmental restrictions can change, at very short notice, often within a week, and the impact that they have on how people are consuming media, how their lives are playing out in the immediate area and beyond or not. That has a big impact on your communications plans and how and where you're going to reach people in the right moment, in the right time, with the right product. So the good news is, as this chart is illustrating, you're looking at the green top section of those bars. You're seeing that for many people, around a third for a lot of channels, are actually consuming more media than they were before. And this is in the kind of early full stages of lockdown. But generally, that has meant that it's been easier in some ways to reach our audiences. But adapting to the nuances within that channel planning has been really critical. So 67% overall have said that they've had more time to consume more media. TV streaming and social has really gone through the roof, particularly through that lockdown time. But there's been shifts, as you might expect. So, for example, in radio, drive time isn't such a thing anymore when so many people are based at home rather than commuting. We see those traditional routines and boundaries, those lines blurring, and it was really important that we adapt. So the challenge for us within media is a lot of our media planning and understanding of how people use channels can be based in long-term data, big data sets, big surveys, which is important for robustness. But with this sudden and rapid change, we needed to find ways of integrating live real-time data into those media channel planning to make sure that we were delivering the right messages in the right place at the right time. So what our solution is, I think there's a couple of examples coming up. Out of home is a really interesting one. Naturally, that lack of commute, the home-based nature and the different restrictions that we face have changed movements. I think that's what is interesting for us through these latter stages in lockdown, is actually it's not that footfall is down massively so much as it's redistributed. And when you're in those lockdown times of higher tiers, what we see is that there is more and more footfall around local areas and less in the concentrated centres of cities. So we took that footfall data. Our partner Posterscope has live footfall tracking called Mobility Index, and when planning for Very, we integrated that with retail online browsing data, so we could see where are the hotspots that people are through these different weeks that we're going to be live with our activity, and adapt our plans to be in those places following our audience. Another way in which we brought live data into our executions was we knew that there was more and more digital video and social content being consumed, but an awful lot of conversation that we want to be part of. So a big campaign for us was the Christmas campaign, which is going brilliantly this year. But we knew in the build up to it that as well as lots of positive, excited conversation about Christmas, there was also going to be a lot of press coverage and lots of angst around Christmas. Will we be able to spend it with loved ones? How many? And so we were able to use a trend optimizer tool from Dentsu Aegis, which enables us to filter for sentiment to be a part of those positive conversations, as well as be a part of the conversations that new trends and new bubbles are emerging around. So these are just a couple of ways in which we've looked to blend online data with offline channels and online channels to make sure that we're in the most relevant places at the right time. And on to our third challenge. So there's been long-term trends out there, there always are, and everyone wants to be on the cusp of the trends. But what we've really seen is the pandemic has absolutely accelerated those. This has happened, for example, in e-commerce and been covered at length, and we're not going to go into that in detail here, but there was obviously a long-term shift to online and more shopping online for a long time before the pandemic, and that's accelerated it and brought that to a much broader demographic. We've seen a similar thing happen when it comes to our mental health, looking after our personal well-being. And also the physical health as well. So the chart on the left looks at personal care, for example, and you see the month-on-month shift from February pre-lockdown to late March post-lockdown, and those purchasing habits on peak days around personal care increasing rapidly. That was an early indicator of actually a trend that's been really here to stay. We've seen around a third of people take part in home fitness, around a third of people exercising more at home, another third of people also saying they're taking more care in what they're eating and trying to eat more healthily. Now, some of these trends, so the mental health trend, for example, has been absolutely the importance of being aware about our mental health and being as aware of it as our physical health has been growing for some time, some years now, but it's really step changed during the course of the pandemic. Similarly with our physical activity and the lengths that we've had to go to try and keep that in shape through the pandemic. Interestingly, skincare, as I'm sure you're all aware, really has seen that boost as people have taken the opportunity of wearing less makeup, although I know I'm definitely not someone that has worn much less makeup with all the video calls, but whereas people have done that, they've taken it as an opportunity to invest more in their skin, which actually presents a much bigger, interesting step change, shifting beauty from being focused purely in or more in appearance into that well-being space, which is such a rich and important territory for people's lives, and is absolutely a trend we see as growing exponentially through the coming years.
Okay, so how to respond to that one? So I think, as Grace said, early in lockdown, it was really obvious that, wellness was more important than ever. Our physical wellness, our mental well-being, with our lives changing so dramatically, it was just part of the dialogue all of the time. And all our usual routes to how we might keep fit with the gym or keep ourselves looking the way we want to with our beauticians and the nail salons, etc., just wasn't accessible to us. So what we did as Very was we went about setting up an IGTV series. And the goal here was about really working with credible content creators to cover themes like beauty, fitness and wellness, but to be able to provide content that our consumer would be able to come back to time and again. So there's just some examples on the screen here of some of the content that we produced with the amazing partners that we found to work with in the different spaces. And really what we did is throughout lockdown, we produced content and we just kept dripping it into our IGTV channel. And then it was all there with the purpose of really, you know, giving our audience a bit of inspiration for how to tackle this particular topic at home by themselves, but also to give them tools. So, you know, actually one of the most reused pieces of content was the workout video that you can see that's just started on the screen here. So a lot of this content, our customers would save it and they were coming back to it time and time again. And actually what we've seen with this content has been really interesting because it's allowed us to reach new audiences as a brand who perhaps weren't engaging with our brand previously, but actually we've also seen really great retention rates of that new audience. So this type of content has really drawn a new audience towards us, but then they've loved the content, they've really engaged with it, they've saved it, they've come back and used it time again, and it's meant that we've retained them as an audience as we continue to go forwards as a business. So for us, this has absolutely shown us a really, really interesting way for us to continue to engage in a dialogue with our customer, offer them something that's really useful, leaning into really credible people in the spaces that we want to talk to, and it feels like a really great recipe for success as we move forwards, not just during this pandemic period that we're in.
And the fourth challenge, so through the pandemic and all the restrictions it brought about, content creation when those traditional production routes are closed is really challenging. I mean, there's a whole host of logistics associated with it, whether it was felt you know, through social distancing in warehouses, the fact that models and photographers were housebound so couldn't create shoots, or even models get fitted for clothing so that they can, you know, create shoots from their own home. All sorts of different challenges. But as the Apple campaign shot here on the right hand side kind of lovely aptly brings to life, you know, creativity must go on, and where there is a will, there is a way. And so it did. And we've got some great, well, Carly has some great examples coming up of how that's happened.
Yeah, so this one was a really interesting challenge for us to go from sort of one day to the next, still needing to fuel our channels with relevant content, but the usual routes to production that we would have always done in terms of photo shoots that we would have physically organised either at locations or within our own studio with models present, we just weren't able to produce content that way. And so what we did was we set about working with our partners, both with influencers and with celebrity partners, to create content in their own home environments. And actually what's really interesting is that, you know, tapping into using celebrity and influencer partners is actually a really good fast track to really on pulse, inspiring and relatable content for our customers. And in this example that you can see on the screen here, this was put out during, you know, the lockdown period. We were all at home, so were all of our celebrity partners and influencers, right? So we were all in the same situation. So seeing them in their home environment interacting with the product was really well received by our audience. So what you can see on the screen here is Michelle Keegan, who's one of our celebrity partners, working with 3 other influencers, showcasing her latest collection on a whole range of different shapes and sizes of gorgeous women. So leaning very much into the craziness of TikTok over this period with the pasta style trend. So this video was created, it was shared on our channels, and it was shared on each of our partners' channels, so it reached a really, really broad audience. The interesting thing here is it worked so well so quickly. So literally within 24 hours, we had 1.2 million impressions on this content. And it worked well commercially too. So the product that you can see in the video, from the day prior to the day that we launched the video, we saw a step up in sales of 176% day on day, just on the lines that we showed in the video. So it really had an immediate impact into sales. It also was really well engaged with, so we've got some really, really lovely comments, particularly about the ability to see the same product on different women, and actually that being a really useful way to be able to interact with that content and really work out if that product was going to be good for their shape and their size. And actually that, we think that's also really helped with the immediate impact through into sales. And for us, you know, body diversity is really, really important. It's a part of that, you know, what we absolutely stand for as a brand. So this piece of content did so many jobs for us. It was so successful. It's actually been our most successful piece of Michelle Keegan content we've ever produced in the years we've been working with her. And it's so interesting that, you know, it's almost the necessity element that forces you into a different way to do it, that's actually identified for us a really great way to produce content going forwards. And the wonderful thing about this is it worked commercially, it worked for Michelle and all the other influencers in terms of it being received by their audiences. The comments on it from a brand perspective were lovely, but it's also cost effective to produce because we didn't need all of the usual setup that would come around in terms of paying for locations and hair and makeup and all those things that we would have done historically. So it's a really nice thing that's ticked so many boxes, really effective piece of content, but also cost effective for us to produce. So felt like a really nice, successful outcome of a pivot in what was quite challenging circumstances early in that lockdown period.
Great. And our fifth and final challenge is to deliver offline experiences online. So dubbed the age of insperience, there's a whole Barclay Card report on this. It is fascinating to see, you know, the scale at which businesses and people have pivoted to get all of those, what we'd usually do in person, outdoors, out and about, whether it be entertainment or learning, and those experiences and getting them online instead. So what we've seen is that a third of UK retailers have launched new in-home products and services since lockdown started on the 23rd of March. Nearly 2/3 of the UK have either tried one or plan to do so in the near future. And interestingly, over a third of consumers now, having tried these new digital experiences and digital ways of doing things, planning on continuing to invest in those post-lockdown. So this is things like at-home wine tasting experiences, virtual fitness classes, and even virtual pottery classes. I have actually got my own pottery delivery waiting for me at home to try and get on board with this trend, as I feel like I have not been doing enough of it. So it's a whole world of experience to be had, and we've got some great examples of how brands have taken advantage.
I love that, Grace, that you're going to be doing pottery, building your skills in pottery. That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. There are actually loads of lovely examples from brands of this. We've just picked out a few just to show some of the themes, really. So the first one, absolutely, you know, as Grace said, so many people have learned a new skill over this period, which I can say I'm definitely not one of them. I'm in awe of the people who've really put this time to really good use to hone their skills. And actually, there's just a really nice example here from Jo Malone, a more recent one connected to the launch of their Christmas campaign. And they had a sell-out online workshop hosted by their resident florist who took people through a sort of a how-to create a beautiful Christmas wreath and connected it to Jo Malone's seasonal scents. So again, a really nice, really relevant way for a brand to engage and give people that a bit more of that physical experience, but actually getting their hands on it and being able to learn a new skill. So that's a really interesting section where lots and lots of brands examples in there. Onto the middle section there, you've got, you know, the all-important, particularly for the beauty industry, one-to-one consultations and being able to get, you know, samples for new product into the hands of your customer. And I think, you know, on the consultation piece, there's various brands who are doing this. Boots is one example, and really moving towards trying to do some of those beauty consultations in a virtual way. I think this taps into as well the piece that we talked about before about underutilized capacity. So if you've got people who would ordinarily be working in stores where perhaps the stores are less busy, there's an opportunity for those staff to repurpose into this virtual beauty consultation world, making sure that in talking to your customer that they're getting the right product for their needs and they're going to be satisfied with that. So making sure that you're going to get a good, happy customer at the end of it. But of course, in that all-important conversation, that there's that upsell opportunity and the chance to be able to talk to the customer about other products that you think could suit their needs as well. So we think that's a really interesting way to pick up something that's so critical in the offline world and try and make that happen in this sort of new remote land we all find ourselves in. Likewise, you know, sampling, the ability to pop a couple of samples in a bag as a customer buys another product in store, just to entice them into thinking about new products that they could try. Much harder to do in the remote space where you haven't got that physical interaction with the customer. But there's this really nice example from Shiseido Beauty, which we thought was also a really good example, because it leaned into the sort of smart speaker trends and people interacting with that technology more over the lockdown period. And actually what they created through Spotify advertising was encouraging listeners to say, send me a sample for NARS, and actually we're able to distribute those samples out to customers through the post. So a really nice connection into actually recognising the type of media that their consumer were using at home and just reaching that audience in a completely different way. And lastly, recreating those experiences that are normally dedicated to that face-to-face experience, and trying to recreate some of those in the home environment. There's a really nice example here from Curzon Cinemas. It's fair to say cinemas have been hit pretty hard through the pandemic, and whilst Curzon is a little bit different because they do have a home cinema streaming solution, nonetheless the closure of their physical locations for a long period has had a significant impact on their business. So this innovation is really interesting because it seeks to bring some of that physical cinema experience into that new home cinema world, which I'm sure many of us have had cinema nights over this period of time in our homes. And what they've done is partnering with Uber Eats to deliver those sort of must-have cinema snacks into the home environment, so all the sort of sweets and popcorn that you would expect, as well as a Negroni slushie, which I think sounds like a pretty interesting cinema treat to have at home. But it's a great example of really working to bring some of that magic of the face-to-face experience that you have into the more remote world, and also a really great example of partnering in order to do so, and recognising where there's a partner that has a skill that can really complement what you're trying to do for your customer. So those are our 5 examples. So really, in summary, it's a sense of, you know, read and respond to the mood of your customer. You know, as Grace said at the beginning, in marketing, we always do that. We're always reading the mood of our customer, but I think the pace of the change and recognising that we need to constantly keep on top of that is the piece that's really intense for us all at the moment. Stay connected, therefore, with how their interests and behaviours shift, and really use that as a way to identify what are those topics that you can engage with, but what are the meaningful ways that you can engage, what are the points where you can offer some utility to your customer. And I think as we all will be doing, continuing to lean into digital and really just trying to innovate around those ways that we can try and recreate some of those more magical moments that perhaps have been dedicated to the offline world historically, and really bring those into the online space. So that was everything that we had to take you through today in terms of content. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully seamlessly navigate to have a look at some of your Q&As. So let's see. So we've got a question here about budget. So let me pop that one live. So is it time to pull back from marketing spend or ramp up to future-proof for your business? So perhaps I'll share some thoughts on that from a very perspective, and then I'll ask Grace just to take a view from a broader media perspective. So I think spend is a really interesting one. I think it's a really difficult one because all of our businesses will have been impacted in different ways, and therefore costs will be thought about differently. I think just to share some examples of how we've worked through that from a very perspective. Obviously, early on in the pandemic, we did what I'm sure many people did, which was really work through, where is our spend fixed? Where is our spend flexible? If it's in the flexible space, actually, are there things that now no longer feel the most relevant and the right thing to do? An example would be, you know, big promotions around occasion wear and holiday shops and things that we absolutely had in train, where we needed to make a decision to stop doing some things because it was the wrong content to put out. And we also had elements where we said, okay, is this going to still commercially return for our business in the way that we would normally expect it to in order to hit our investment guardrails? And, you know, an example there would be, we had out-of-home advertising booked in that first lockdown that we made the decision to pull back from because mobility massively reduced in that first lockdown as we all spent so much time at home. So we made those immediate decisions. And then really for us, it's about keeping as much of our spend in that flexible space as we can. Because as we think forward, I think, we absolutely want to find efficient ways to produce really great content for our customers. And actually, we're really happy that we've been able to, through the partnership approach that we've just talked through, found a way actually to create really quickly really relatable content in a cost-effective way. So that's a really good opportunity for us going forwards. And the other thing that we do is our digital spend is very much focused on consumer demand. So what we don't do in digital is fix ourselves to a level of spend. It ebbs and flows with the consumer demand that's in the market. So, we will have some assumptions about, for example, how quickly will we all start to buy fashion again, right? So if women's wear fashion is one of the parts of the market that's dipped the most. When will that start to ramp back up again? To a certain extent, none of us really know that, so we have to plan and be really, really flexible and agile around how we think about that. So for us, it's most important to set up our campaigns so that we keep as much of our spend in that flexible space as we can, and then we'll adjust to consumer mood and market demands as we go. But perhaps, Grace, do you want to share some thoughts from a broader media perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from what we see is that the evidence suggests if you're in a position to continue to invest in your brand through a recession, you absolutely should. Whilst this global pandemic is something of a scale and a potential longevity that we haven't seen before, the best thing we can do is to look back to past recessions, and there have been plenty of those, to gather data on and look at what has worked in the past, what's happened to brands who have continued or even ramped up investment, and what's happened to those that have pulled back. And the evidence does suggest that it's right to continue to invest, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is to maintain your brand health, so your brand is in a strong position to pick up again as when sort of trading conditions and consumer spend sort of emerges from the recession. And if you pull back from that brand spend in the interim, you've kind of got that deficit. You're not at top of consumers' minds. You don't have those recent associations. And so actually it takes a lot longer, many years longer, for brands then to catch up, having pulled back and gone dark during that time. The other thing that's important to note is that you might stop communicating, but your competitors may well continue. And again, they're going to kind of steal a march on you. And that is why that lag is so then difficult to make up. And I think it's really important that we sort of think about as building brands and not just as in terms of that short-term sales piece. The ability, as we've seen throughout this presentation, people are still have needs. They are still very much looking to brands for support. There are so many opportunities to add value and build up those positive associations. And through a recession, that doesn't go away. If anything, those opportunities are potentially greater, and the impact that you can have more stark. And so but the thing on the converse point to the one I just made is that, if you are able to continue to invest and your competition doesn't, then you'll have a greater share of mind, which can then lead on to a greater share of market, both during that recessionary period and then importantly out the other side as well. So based on sort of business performance and also the share of voice opportunity, continue to invest if you can.
Great, thanks, Grace. There's actually a connected question on budget here, which is specifically then calling out how to best deal with media owners to maximise flexibility. I wonder if you want to share some thoughts on that. I know, for example, as we've been talking about our out of home, we've been thinking about how we can maintain flexibility in that space. Do you maybe want to share some thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a dialogue around the issues that are facing the market, your business, and your spending plans, maintaining that dialogue is really important. As you alluded to there, Carly, out of home was a really key example. The market responded. They recognised that the traditional booking periods, booking far out, not knowing whether what stage of lockdown or what tier an area might be in, recognising that there was so much uncertainty, they sort of made more opportunities to be flexible and to change campaigns in a much more agile way than previously. We also saw that with TV A/B deadlines at the height of the pandemic, which are traditionally kind of a couple of months out or so, varies, and they became much shorter. So I think it's really important to have that dialogue, because the media owners are, they're looking to respond and be relevant and help make their placements and connections with consumers work as well as possible. So I think a dialogue is probably the best way to go.
Great, thanks, Grace. And there's one here, which is, what differences have you seen between lockdown 2.0 and what happened previously? So I think from a very perspective, if we think about the very first lockdown, I think we were all in such a state of shock, weren't we? And there was real uncertainties actually about things like, well, would we be able to continue to fulfill, getting orders to customers? There was real concern around actually, will we be able to keep delivering what customers need? And what that meant was there was a real scarcity and a nervousness from customers about being able to get the products that they wanted. So, we went from one day to the next, we were home working, from one day to the next, we were homeschooling, we were home gymming, we were home everything. So there was these really big spikes for really urgent products that customers thought, actually, I actually can't survive through a lockdown at home without a laptop because my kids aren't going to be able to homeschool, or I'd like some fitness equipment in the house. So we saw all these really, really urgent spikes that were coupled with really brands not being able to keep up really with the stock that was required. So we had this sort of scarcity feeling to it, which created this big peaks and troughs in activity. And I would say the difference with this lockdown is we knew what would be able to continue versus what wouldn't. Those very urgent products that we just need to survive, by now we've sort of all done those. And so we're a bit more in a rhythm of it. So I think the first one, we saw lots and lots of peaks and troughs and huge swings in what customers were buying. Literally, one day it was laptops, the next day it was home, treadmills, the next day it was outdoor toys to keep the kids entertained, and it really, really swung as we saw customers going through different phases. This time I would say it's been steadier. There's still been more online demand, of course, because with the shops closed, the offline to online has continued to happen. But I think it's been less urgency and less peaky, if you like, would be my observation of that one. Okay, I'm conscious of time. Let's see. How do you cut through online when everyone is focusing on digital and building new experiences? So I think this one is a really challenging one, actually. So obviously, Very are a digital retailer, so we were already in that space. So arguably, the urgency that some brands have got to move into the digital space we didn't have. But actually, now we're in a world where we're all going to be trying to make those digital experiences the best that they can, and it's ultimately going to create a more competitive environment online. So that's something that we're all going to have to face into. What I would say from the way we're thinking about it is that it really doesn't feel like there's one silver bullet. I think it sticks with know your audience, know how they want to engage with you, know where they are, and then maximize that journey of communications with them. All of those things, by the way, will keep changing in terms of what their needs are and where they are. So it is about keeping abreast of that. So it'll be about really maximizing those content creator partners that you can work with to really shortcut to content that's really on pulse and inspiring in that moment for your consumer. I would say make sure that content works really hard for you. Content that you produce for your site will not work for Instagram and will not work for YouTube. So it's thinking about what platforms that you want to communicate to your customer in, and then really how you can have a consistent proposition, but then tweak the way that content comes to life so that it maximizes the power of the platform that you're in. So there's one thing that you definitely need to survive in a digital space. It's a really good video editing team, because you want to be able to create one set of content which is really consistent, but edit that in a way that it really works for the different platforms. And the last thing I would say is really think about the power of digital in the space of things like interactivity, for example, but make sure that the campaigns that you produce are genuinely useful. So to give you an example, last Christmas we created a chatbot, a Facebook Messenger chatbot, which was a really nice way to interact with our audience, and it was really engaging, and it was connected to our above the line advertising. So our character from our TV ad was featured in our chatbot, and it was really successful for us. But I think the key to why it was successful is because it actually had a really interesting utility to our audience. So what we were offering people the chance to do is work out a really great gift to give a child in your life that would be an inspirational gift for the future. And so the chatbot would ask some questions. So what's the age of the child, the gender, some interests, what's the budget of the gift that you're wanting to buy into? And then we presented a curated range of gift options back to that customer. They could immediately pick the one that worked for them, go straight through to product page and purchase. So it was really nice and interactive, and it was fun and it was engaging because it connected to the TV, and it really worked in Facebook, which that's absolutely where that type of interactivity really, really works. But it was also genuinely useful and really smooth product purchase experience off the back of it. So taking it all the way through and making sure that it's super useful and really smooth was the thing that I think really stood out. So it'll be lots of small things, I think, rather than one silver bullet. And then in the interest of time, I'll just take one last question. So we've got, what's your one tip for brand planning looking ahead to 2021? I think my one tip would just be stay agile. We as consumers have changed so much over the last 10 months. It's absolutely not over yet. The one thing we know for sure is we've got, some more tough months ahead of us. When we come out of the back of this pandemic, we'll all be trying to find our new normal. We'll all be settling into what we want our new worlds to be. And so we'll all be just working that out as we go. And we as brands just need to stay close to that, stay close to our consumer. How are their thoughts and feelings evolving? And then adjust and change our plans to stay relevant. So assume that whatever you've got planned and whatever you think is going to happen probably won't be the thing that actually happens, and make sure that you're able to, in a really agile way, move and adjust as you learn more about how your consumer is feeling. Then, Grace, would you like to share a thought on that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think actually my thought works a really complementary way to yours against that kind of backdrop of the rapid change and the agile monitoring. I think also tuning into those longer term trends. We talked about how the pandemic has really been an accelerating force on several trends that actually had their roots in way before coronavirus had even been mentioned, even in China. And so actually leaning into those longer term trends, monitoring how consumer needs around them are evolving, that can help you stay on the forefront and have some longer term brand plans that then complementary to those more real-time pivots around the changes that are developing and accelerating as they're happening. So definitely tune into those, align your brand for the long term, because whilst it's important to be very agile and short term, if everything's all up in the air all the time, it becomes very stressful and very difficult to plan for. So that blend of long-term trends and short-term agility is, I'd say, the big tip for 2021.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Thank you, Grace. So I think that is all we've got time for today. So thank you very much from Grace and I. We've really enjoyed putting the content together for you guys. I hope you found that interesting. Really happy to follow up afterwards with anybody that's got any questions or would like to chat about anything. So do please just reach out via the CEW team if that would be useful. But for now, I'll hand us back to Sally.
Thank you very much indeed, both of you. I think it was a really fascinating session this afternoon. We probably could have had a full-blown conference on this topic. So many questions, and as Carly said, if there are any unanswered questions or any further questions, please let us know and we'll pass them on. I've got some housekeeping, I'm afraid, today. We have our Achiever Awards on the 15th of December, which is sponsored by the Very Group, among others. And tickets for this are now available on the CEW website. We've filled some amazing content with our winners this year, which we can't wait to share with you. And you'll also receive the most wonderful beauty treats along with your ticket, including a not yet released skincare set from Drunk Elephant. So everybody's very excited about that. We'll also be opening our 2021 Beauty Awards in the next few days, and there will be an early bird rate for entries for a limited period and some really exciting new categories, which we can't wait to share. I think I've mentioned before that the demo is going to be taking place at the end of May next year rather than February, to allow enough time for us to plan accordingly, according to COVID restrictions, but we very much are optimistic that we'll be able to hold that at Olympia with you all next year. But for now, thank you to all of you. Thank you to Very. Thank you to Dentsu for joining us today. Please keep in touch and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.